as I began then to see the conscious role that I was playing, the interpretations, the meanings that I was making of these events that were leading me into those reactive emotional cycles, now I began to play that part, embody that part of being that conscious participant. So I'm laboring this because for me, it didn't come immediately. It was very much something that I defended, I battled, wasn't the case until I think is the case for most of us, saw in my own lived experience how, wait a minute, I am creating what's happening, even though it is really difficult to see in real time, that I am somewhere in that trajectory.
Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and it is my pleasure and honor to have Dr. Nicole LePera with us. Nicole is the author of the New York Times, #1 New York Times bestselling book, How to Do the Work, and recently released bestselling How to Meet Yourself workbook. She is the creator of the Self-Healers, #Self-Healers movement, and founded Self-Healers Circle, the first virtual self-guided healing membership where members in over 100 countries are joining together to heal in community. She's the host of the weekly ad-free podcast, Self-Healers Soundboard, with over 5 million downloads. Nicole, it's so great to have you on the show.
Stephan, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I'd love to start with your origin story, how you ended up writing these books and becoming such a source of inspiration for so many on Instagram and social media in general. You have a huge fan base and follower base. How did this all come about?
Well, thank you for sharing those very kind words. And if you would have asked me a decade ago if writing books were in my future, if being a public presence was in my future, I would have said absolutely not. Very much, as long as I can remember, I was the little girl afraid of the world, very shy, also very interested in humans, human behavior, what made people think differently than myself and do different things. So before very long, very motivated in terms of academics. I was marching toward being a clinical psychologist with the hopes of helping people gain self-awareness and, ease the suffering that on the personal side of my life I had related to very much, having that anxiety-based experience as long as I can remember. Flash forward very many years of schooling, I opened up a successful private practice in Philadelphia where I was living at the time. And I found myself feeling very frustrated several years in. I imagine right alongside with many of the clients that I was working with, seeing a similar pattern in people and in myself included, which was that we could have increasing amounts of insight, awareness, talk about issues, even problem solve, come up with action based plans to break the habits that aren't serving us, to relieve the suffering that we're experiencing. Yet, time and time again, week after week, what I was meeting in my own life and seeing in my clients was being stuck, the inability to translate all of this insight into action. So for me, it really was deep diving into first exploration. Why? I got curious. Why are so many of us stuck in so many of these ways? And for me, it was coming up with new information that at this point included our physical bodies, our nervous system, and really began to then shift the way I thought about our human experience, our suffering, and embracing much more of a holistic model, which for me then became a platform I utilized, which was social media, seeing how people were beginning to share their stories, with that being my intention. Very much in my profession, we're taught in a lot of ways not to share our human journey, our human side of things. And because for the first time ever, I was making such progress, I was actually beginning to transform those symptoms of lifelong anxiety. I created the holistic account, this holistic psychologist Instagram account, as a way for me to begin to practice sharing my own authentic journey, my story, and hopefully tools for other people, which as soon as I created the account really displayed to me how universally resonating both the experience of being stuck and also this shift in terms of embracing a more holistic model of wellness, creating change. And of course, something I know you know something about, which is transformation of our entire life.
So was there a moment where you hit like rock bottom or some sort of uh, dark night of the soul through this journey of dealing with lifelong anxiety issues?
Yeah, so it was for me many different moments. In terms of anxiety, really within my 20s is when I started to have my first panic attacks. Feeling completely overwhelmed, completely debilitated. At one point, even being in a jacket, ready to take myself to the hospital for the heart attack that I imagined that I was suffering in that moment. So many moments of really being overwhelmed by my anxiety and really unsure of how to stabilize myself, what to do. Again, at that point, I thought for me it was just a aspect of navigating this anxiety, meaning there was no healing, there was no possibility that I wouldn't be an anxious being. It's the only way I knew myself. So again, how can I create some level of living with this anxiety, but feeling really drowning in those moments? And then another series of moments after I had achieved everything that I thought was going to translate for me into this fulfilling life, after I hung my shingle, if you will, and had that private practice, after I found myself into a relationship. I had a very active social life. I was living externally in all of these ways that weren't translating to me feeling connected to my life, to me feeling fulfilled. And having no language of understanding, if I'm being perfectly honest, I felt really shameful. I looked around and thought, well, Nicole, you have no reason to be feeling so empty the way that you are. Yet when I really pulled back, I saw that for me, emptiness was such a theme throughout my life. And actually, all of the endless achieving that I had now come to the end of, right, that endless to do list, was my best attempt at filling that emptiness, that deep rooted feeling that I had for as long as I can remember. So I would say it's more of a series of moments of coming not only to into the suffering of what I very much call a dark night of the soul, but then gaining clarity as to why I was feeling that way, which then allowed me to create the change in my life that I'm currently living.
Now, there's this adage that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. So you've mentioned a few times here suffering. Do you believe that it is true suffering, or is it just pain that maybe you mislabeled, or maybe generally people are mislabeling?
Yeah, I think that, the pain and all aspects of emotions in terms of the human experience is very much part of our human experience. And the question is when we shift into, kind of that aspect of suffering, what is our relationship, right, with that pain? And for me, I know that being emotionally under supported early on in my childhood, I actually didn't learn how to tolerate pain or any emotional discomfort because I didn't have that safe, that attuned human in the form of my mother in particular, who was the primary caregiver for me and my two siblings. Without that space to learn how to navigate my emotions, I adapted just like we will all do, and I began to distract myself, to suppress my emotions, creating then this cycle of suffering. Because really, to simplify it, what I was doing is I was overwhelmed by any emotions in general. So to deal with that overwhelm, I distanced myself, only creating an accumulation now of that suffering based experience. And again, saying all that to say, and I really love that we're kind of going down this rabbit hole because I think some of us have this idea that the goal of life, right, of living a centered life is to get to some hypothetical utopian place where pain doesn't exist. And that's not the case at all. The question more so is, what is my relationship to the very real, inevitable ups and downs, painful experiences of life? And am I someone who can keep myself safe and support it when I'm having those painful moments?
Was there a moment where you had this epiphany or download or perspective shift that we live in a matrix, or this is all an illusion, or I'm in a video game, or this is all divinely orchestrated, or I see now that this is something I created for myself, or whatever the epiphany was? Was there some sort of moment like that for you?
Well, I will begin by being honest and sharing that as I read those concepts, which, I met in books, other people living their life in the embodiment of that reality, I very much fought it. I denied it. I reserved myself as this extra special being who that isn't the case for. I disempowered myself by, I think, living the habitual patterns that many of us do when they exist outside of our awareness. We have no other option but to feel like the world around us is impacting us, as opposed to we're impacting the world around us. We're even going as far to be a creator, right, into the world around us. And again, I'm saying that's understandable and natural because when we are driven by that autopilot that so many of us are locked in on the day to day, we don't feel like we have that space to step into that creator role. It very much feels like things happen. I'm now caught up in the feeling, the reaction of, how I feel about what happened. And, if I'm lucky, I'm catching myself while I'm reacting to those emotions. So as I met this beautiful concept of, wait a minute, that's not the case at all. You are a being with agency. You are impacting the world. You can create the actions and you can create your responsiveness to the actions or to the happenings around you. I very much, as many of us do, when we meet a new idea and when it doesn't match to our lived experience, we refute it. I rolled my eyes and said, oh, that's really great that you have that power to be a conscious creator in your world. I don't for all of these reasons. So as I began then to see the conscious role that I was playing, the interpretations, the meanings that I was making of these events that were leading me into those reactive emotional cycles, now I began to play that part, embody that part of being that conscious participant. So I'm laboring this because for me, it didn't come immediately. It was very much something that I defended, I battled, wasn't the case until I think is the case for most of us, saw in my own lived experience how, wait a minute, I am creating what's happening, even though it is really difficult to see in real time, that I am somewhere in that trajectory.
Yeah, there's a moment, I think, for most of us, I would guess, where there's that glitch in the matrix, and it cracks open our reality or our sense of stability in this supposed reality that we think that we're living in. And for me, just one example was I was listening to a podcast. It was the Melissa Rivers show in the background, and I was also reading from a book, just the I think introduction or first chapter. I hadn't even purchased it yet. It was the read inside the book feature on Amazon, and it was a psychic medium that wrote this book. And anyways, I was reading it and also listening to the podcast in the background, which I don't recommend. it's, uh, it's not very effective to do both at the same time. But as I was doing this, the word I read at the moment I read it came through the podcast, which was really bizarre. I'd never had that experience before in my life. And I didn't know what to do with that. So I just kept reading. It was an uncommon word. I don't remember the word, but I remember that's very weird. This is not normal. And I kept reading, and 5 minutes later, it happened again. Like, what are the odds of something like that happening? So I knew that this was a sign that I needed to do something with that, and I ended up going to the author's website and joining her Patreon community, and it's been life changing. It's been absolutely life changing, and it wouldn't have occurred if I hadn't taken those two nudges and connected some dots and said, okay, I'm supposed to do something with this rather than just read her book. So I'm curious if you've had that kind of paranormal, extrasensory, uh, out of this, like extraordinary, out of this, out of the ordinary kind of world experience that you can't explain away.
Yeah, I actually got chills listening to you share those two moments. And for me, I think it's many moments, throughout even a general day where I'm thinking about someone and that email or that text comes in, or I'm thinking for the most recent one, I've been thinking about a new book idea actually, and I've been toying around, with a concept, and it's still kind of very new. And as I'm thinking about it, and I go online, I see that concept, presented in a different lens and a different light. And for me, I take those moments throughout, and again, they can happen in small micro moments throughout a day where something comes to my heart, to my mind, to my awareness, and then I'm seeing that reflected in that email message or that meme that someone else posted that I don't even follow their account, yet somehow it's crossing my pathway today. And I've learned now to be very open to those moments, to even have the possibility of seeing that alignment, which for me means that my attention is present in that given moment, which is not habitually how I operated for so long. My attention was every other place than what was immediately happening for me. And also to have trust in that affirmation, to see the universe as a part, as a collaborator, as opposed to working against me. And coming again from a childhood, having had different, beliefs modeled to me, again, being raised by humans who were locked in their own overwhelmed survival mode, the messaging I got in childhood was that the world was actually scary. It was not conspiring with me. It was actually, and the reason why I very intentionally even described myself as a little girl afraid of the world, embodied this anxiety, is because that was so much of the messaging, that things out there are scary or overwhelming or dangerous. The universe isn't something to be, kind of cooperating with me. It's actually against me. And one of my family mantras for a very long time has been, it's always something. And I very much embody that, always looking to the environment, the universe, if you will, not to provide me with that positive, supportive, collaborative something of affirmation, but to be the threatening thing that prevented me from, even bring this full circle, right? Being someone who's a conscious creator in the world around me. So for me, even being open to conversations like I'm having with you, these small moments of time where the universe is nodding at me, is a huge embodied shift from my past lived experience that began in my own childhood.
Wow. It's funny that you used the terminology you did, because the book I'm working on is going to come out probably in at least another year's time, but it's Living in a Friendly Universe.
There's a nod from the universe right here in our conversation for you.
Yeah. And that title, by the way, it came to me. It wasn't one I came up with. It was gifted to me from above. If we do live in a friendly universe, it's not conspiring against you, as you say. It's conspiring with us to create such amazing, miraculous experiences and opportunities and love and growth. Yeah, it's magic.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I love even that you kind of acknowledging it just came to me. And I have so many moments of that when I'm speaking, when I'm teaching, when I'm having conversations like this, when I'm thinking about creating another, entity such as a book. And that is the best way that I would describe it as well, right? I'm in this flow state, whether or not I'm speaking something outwardly in my flow state, but words, ideas, concepts are just coming to me in that particular, kind of sequencing or language or the particular word I chose to use at any given moment. And the same thing happens. I had a conversation with someone else who was an author getting ready to write a book, and they were looking for some practical suggestions in terms of, should I be reading other people's books when I'm creating my own book? And, I shared from my own lived journey, it's when I'm not reading, when I'm having a moment in the sun, when I'm on a walk by myself, that I have those kind of download moments where concepts come to mind, or particular sequences of ideas, where I get clarity in book titles or the such comes in. It's not when I'm doing or my attention is on someone or something else. It's when I'm in that, what for me just feels like that alignment, where my intention is just so present to myself, to my physical body, and to my awareness of that moment, that it does feel like it drops down from somewhere above and it's just there on my tongue, in my words that I'm jotting down or what have you.
Yeah, magic. And these these messages, the collaboration is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. I didn't realize to what degree it was. Like uh, somebody will give a reading, for example, a psychic reading or an intuitive reading, like medical intuition or something like that, and they can use more than just the, let's say, the clairaudience or the clairvoyance that they might have. Something might cross their path in the window behind them, or in front of them, and then they see that, and that was not random. That was part of the message. That was part of the guidance. You got chills, you said a few minutes ago, as I was relaying my story about the word and the podcast is happening simultaneously with me reading it. So chills, I learned, is that's not goosebumps as much as it's angel bumps. That's confirmation from your angels that what you're experiencing is truth, which is really cool. Sometimes you'll notice a number, maybe on your clock, maybe on the computer, a road sign, and it just jumps out at you, and that's called an angel number. and you're meant to look that up and to decode what the message is. It's not just a hello. It's like, oh, that's the third time today I got 1111. That's weird. No, it's not weird. It's a message. It's part of what you're supposed to work with. That's part of the clay that you're creating with. And yeah, I just find that really amazing. Things like you turn on the radio and it's this song that maybe is 30 years old that you never hear anymore, but that was the second time you heard it that day. And it's like, these are messages. Do you have a lot of that happening, or is that just kind of a once in a while occurrence?
I funny enough, when you affirmed angel bumps, is that what you called them?
Yeah,
I love
angel
that.
bumps.
I
Yeah.
in that exact moment, I affirm that that is indeed through my own. So for me, it's very much I pay attention to when I get those angel bumps, those chills. It even sometimes can be an energetic where I feel tingly in that same moment, which is very much affirmation. I take that, I note those moments when they happen. I don't know, Furkan, if you heard me. He's here with me behind the scenes. And before we got started, I proclaimed, 11:11 when I picked my phone up. So, and interestingly, I love this question of kind of, so to answer your question, do I notice those moments? Absolutely. And I do notice variation in when I notice more of those moments. And what I mean to say in this moment is when I'm very aligned with myself, when I'm taking care of my body, which for me is foundational, making sure that I have moments before I go into my doing mode of all of the things that I can be, allotting my attention to throughout the day, usually a work project, something very inspirational. For me, I know how important it is to be the being that's going to be the channel for all of those projects later on in the day, which is taking care of my body, making sure that I'm grounded, I'm attentional with how my body's feeling on any given day, and then giving myself the opportunity to move it if it needs, if there's some stagnant energy out there, to rest it if it's feeling a bit tired, to make sure that it's getting the nutrients that it needs and sleeping well and all of the things. And saying that to say, when I'm in alignment, when I'm making sure that I'm taking care of my body and I'm able to then be in that flow state for more moments of my day, happens to be when I notice more moments of those angel numbers, of my own body being that kind of antenna or that sensor, or that thing walking by that I know for me, or that song on the radio that I know for me has a particular message. And similarly in moments, because there are many moments where I'm stressed out, I'm not doing all of those foundational things, and I'm feeling more agitated and more overwhelmed. Those are the moments where I'm less likely to be, I think, in that alignment state, to be seeing those messages. And it might not be that they aren't even, they might be very much there in my environment. But the question then for me is, well, where is my attention? Is it available to receive those messages? Or for me, am I distracted, right? In worries in my mind and fears about what is coming? Or am I just somewhere else entirely? One of my habitual coping mechanisms is to go to that dissociated, disconnected state where my mind almost becomes blank. I'm physically present to things that are happening around me, but I'm not attentionally. I'm not in that alignment of presence. And I'm just, again, laboring this point because I think a lot of people have this idea that it's more like a light switch, right? Once you get into this state of alignment, that there are never moments where you see those habitual coping mechanisms, or you're just distracted or dysregulated or agitated or explosive, or all the things that we naturally become when we're not dealing or grounded within our stressful life experiences. Almost going back to what we began this conversation, emotions are going to happen. The question is, right, can I navigate them happening in that grounded, responsive state? So I do have moments still to this day where I'm not grounded, where I'm not doing the things that my body needs for me to be able to sustain stressful experiences. And those are the moments where I'm less likely to see the presence of this alignment that I do believe is always there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it makes sense that like I say, a super state of consciousness where you're feeling so connected, plugged in to the fabric of creation and one with the creator, that is not necessarily where you're going to stay. Most likely you're going to drop, because it's like a roller coaster where you are in this super state, you're connected, you're flying high, and you don't have the desire to do anything because you've already recognized that you're in the fulfillment. Everything is already there for you. And so there's nothing to build, to do. just bask in the unconditional love. And then you have to crash back down to earth and get back into the desire, like, all right, I'm going to build something, like I got to hustle. And the fulfillment seems so far away, even though it's already there. It just hasn't materialized in the physical plane yet. And then you build and grow, and you hustle and you work hard, and you deal with your demons, and then you get back into a super state of consciousness, and whoa, this is amazing, flying high again, and back and down and up and down and up and down.
I couldn't agree more. And I even love kind of, I think what's the message woven in here is that discomfort, what I was describing earlier, that was something that I avoided at all costs, actually has value, right? It indicates when things aren't aligned for us, when we're not, feeling that elevated state of consciousness. It gives us an indicator on things that aren't maybe working in our life or keeping us safe. And again, I say that because so many of us, myself for sure, get so good at suppressing the discomfort of life, at distracting ourselves away, at disconnecting from it, and we lose then the value, the message. So for me, having those moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, I've achieved everything, right? Yet I feel so empty. If I didn't allow that emptiness, if I didn't allow myself to be present to that emptiness, I wouldn't have been able to see all of the different things in my life that weren't necessarily working for me. So I think this speaks to the point again of, our emotions have value, even our discomfort. And so many of us, because again, we're not equipped, we didn't have the objective physical resources in our childhood to have a safe environment. We didn't have the emotional resources of the other caregivers to create emotional safety, that our adaptation, the way that we've learned to feel safest, is by not allowing ourselves to be present to that discomfort. It doesn't mean that the discomfort isn't there. We get so good at distracting ourselves, yet over time, and this is what I lived the experience of, it's just accumulating. So being present to it, having those bottoms, that dark night of the soul, and feeling that suffering, that is included in that, is for many of us what allows us to see the areas that we want to begin to make those changes.
Yeah, because all growth happens outside your comfort zone. And so do you invite these opportunities in, maybe even go online and see what your detractors have to say about you on the negative Amazon reviews on your books, or you're looking at the YouTube comments on your videos to see what the haters have to say, or you just try and stay well away from all that?
I absolutely look, and I'm aware they're there. I know for me, one of the things that prevented me, not only messaging I was getting from my field of not sharing my human side, of not being a being in the room, for me, it was a lot of deep rooted shame where I didn't have that safety, that attuned caregiver to just be curious about who I was and how I was. So showing myself in any capacity. And this is again why when I began my kind of background story of even creating the Instagram account, it wasn't necessarily to give other people tools as much as it was an exercise for me in learning how to be seen for all of my humanness, the messy, the imperfections, not just how I've curated this life of achievement that in the areas that I was very naturally gifted at, athletics and academics, that felt safe for me. I was really practicing with this account, the holistic psychologist, in just being me. So sharing all that to say that I still have that little wounded girl who's so afraid that she's not enough, that's so afraid of negative feedback, of misinterpretation, of people just not liking me for whatever reason, that's a familiar habitual pattern for me. So now that I have the objective reality that I know that there are all endless opinions from misinterpretations, just outright people don't like me for whatever reason out there in the world, there are many moments where I can find myself cycling into seeking out that account, looking at that comment, not looking at the 5-star reviews on my book, but looking specifically at the 1 stars to upset myself. And for me, it's really becoming aware, of when those moments happen. And those moments happen typically when I'm feeling stressed out, when I'm feeling insecure, maybe when I do have something new that I birthed out into the world. And that little girl who's so afraid of what people are going to think wants to find in some way that affirmation that I'm as terrible as I imagine myself to be, that I'm just as unworthy as I once thought. So being that conscious participant, again, going beautifully full circle in this conversation, means in those moments, watching myself, asking myself before I click on Amazon reviews or that hater's account to read those opinions, really giving myself that one moment to consciously decide why I'm doing it, if I have the resources to tolerate how it might feel once I see what is said, and then giving myself in that moment the opportunity just as much to not click on that. But again, I would be lying if I said no. I only look at the good. I channel all my attention into the positive. I don't. I look at all of it. And again, I'm more likely to look in those more difficult spaces when I'm already feeling bad, feeling down, feeling insecure about myself.
One thing that is hard to do, but it's so powerful if you can achieve it, is to see the hand of God in all of these people who are um, poking holes and trying to criticize and put you down. It is so powerful. It's like you're outside of the video game. You're in the video game, not you're in the world, not of the world. You're in it and you're out at the same time. And it's very, very powerful. So like, okay, this is just a message for me from above. This person and the feeling I'm feeling in my body, the sensations, the triggering, these are all messages for me. Just like I might get a message of a blue jay landing on the windowsill. If I feel that that's a message, it probably is. If I feel that I can learn something and grow from this detractor who's saying something completely unfounded and untrue, then I see it as the voice of God speaking through that person.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think what has been important for me to remain in my awareness is that physical aspect of things, the how I feel. I think historically, I got really good at having this idea that I was being so compassionate to other people, understanding where they came from, even people that were outright hurting me in relationship, in whatever way that it is, that I would almost, you know, compassionate myself and overstep the hurt, the pain, the wounding that was happening in those moments. I was almost giving them a green card of doing, saying, being however it is that they wanted to be in the moment because I understood it was coming from a pained place and my emotional experience of what they were saying or doing or how they were being didn't matter. So, what has become really important for me is to expand in that space and say, I can compassionately understand, right? See the hand of God, see the hurt being and the love that is still a channel through them. And at the same time, become aware of when I don't have the resources, when my limits are being reached. Because until I became aware of that, what would happen for me, right, is I would again have this idea that, oh, there is no impact. This is just a wounded human. Let me see what they say. Meanwhile, internally, my body is tensing, my muscles are tensing, I'm growing agitated. And then I'm signing offline and I'm turning to my two very loving partners. And that agitation is now coming out in my interaction with them. So making space for the reality that I can understand this, I can see the hand of God, I can see where they're coming from, and there are still moments where to protect my own physical well-being, my own emotional well-being and groundedness for my relationships, it's important to me to put up that boundary, not to look in that moment, to look at a time when I have the resources available and I can be more grounded, to give my experience and how it impacts my body some space and some light. Again, because I hadn't done that for so long. And all I had done as a result then is accumulate all of that anger of being violated, of not speaking up for myself. And instead of, taking the responsibility like I'm doing right now and saying, well, wait a minute, Nicole, you didn't give space to it. You didn't put up a limit. You didn't tell someone that this was problematic. I just pointed right the finger at everyone else that was causing the problem.
If we can see the gift in absolutely everything, that it's all miraculous. For example, the lack of safety that you experienced from your caregivers when you were a child, and see those as soul contracts or sacred contracts, to see them as gifts from the Creator, as um, something that you signed up for, knowing full well what you were in for before you even incarnated, because you could see the other end of the tunnel. And then you, of course, forgot because of the veil of forgetting when we incarnate. But I'm curious to hear what your take is on that.
Yeah, I think, we are a conscious participant in our earthly experiences from even, before we are physically present on earth. And, once we become present, and we are now with other humans who've gone through that same cycle of evolution, who've gone through them the same impact of living with other human beings, right? We can only be and model that which we learned from our own previous caregivers, right? Now we create this cycle of human suffering. Again, many of us losing the big picture, many of us falling into blame, for those that have hurt us. And it's not to say that we weren't hurt or a victim to our circumstances. Absolutely. Many of us were in early childhood, but even to use myself, right? I don't hold my parents responsible for their emotional unavailability in my childhood. I see it as a function of you know, the impact of the other humans that they were raised from, the circumstances, the context in which they were raised. And again, seeing then how it is to be a soul, right? Have the greater picture, have this awareness, have even this intention of what our journey is meant to be. And at the same time, navigate the human experience of all of that and the impact of past human experiences, I think becomes the complicated nature of living as a human being here. And so I very much think that's part of the entire journey here is to make sense of those different layers of our reality of our journey.
In your writings, you write about the authentic self and how to become reconnected with her or him. Is the authentic self with or without personality? Is it the soul on the other side of the veil, or up in the heavens, or the higher self, the light avatar, whatever you want to refer to it, oversoul, or is it like just a human flawed personality that we might have inherited as our soul incarnated?
I think that when I use, put it this way, the term authentic self, I think it is our purest state of being. So whether or not it's the word soul or spirit or essence, it's kind of before, right? We were conditioned and impacted by the external, the 3D, the human world around us. And so very much I think that, kind of connects to this idea of the soul, the spirit, kind of that greater being that again has a bunch of lived experiences and is impacted. And then we do form into, I even love that we're bringing up this concept of personality, right? I think a lot of what we're calling personality and what a lot of us think is genetically, imprinted on us is actually a constellation of our habitual patterns of dealing with those earliest environments. I do believe that we all have natural gifts, talents, quirks, ways of being. My unique expression in the world is going to be different than anyone else's, right? The way I say things, the way I make sense of things, make meaning of things in my pure state of being is going to be unique to me. Though, again, I think what a lot of us are calling personality is just all of our habitual patterns that we've grown and wrapped around ourselves as an identity. So, the work that I'm interested in doing is first creating space and awareness that most of what we're living and most of the habits that are directing our life are actually conditioned from our very early experiences so that then over time we can create space to begin to get curious and drop into those deeper sets of authentic wants, needs, interests, purpose, passions, and everything in between. That again, I think we retain with us through life, though what happens over time is we just become very separate, disconnected, and even shut down to its expression.
Now, you mentioned constellation as a word a minute ago, and what came to mind was family constellation therapy. Is that something that you've studied or practiced?
I probably at this point have studied or learned about every single way to practice or think about a human being inside of my program and outside of my program. I was always endlessly learning all the different types of modalities. So, yes, from family constellation, this idea of the physical individuals present in our family systems, to internal family systems, this idea of the different parts of even our self that make up our daily habitual expressions. So I think all of that is very important to consider. Oftentimes those two are related: the people that we've grown up with or around, the beliefs that were modeled to us in those earliest relationships in terms of our family constellation often then impact the different parts of ourself that then we express in the world around us.
Something you said earlier too about it's used to be a kind of a tape in your head of it's always something. and that manifests that horrible reality when that's the tape you keep playing. And that reminded me of Tony Robbins' teaching about the primary question at Date with Destiny. So the primary question, if it's how do I stay safe, or am I safe? That question that might be in the deep, deep layers of the subconscious would shape the person's reality. So if, let's say, she's going to a party or she's going on a first date, if that's the primary question, how do I stay safe? That creates a whole reality that really sucks, probably. It's creating a lot of pain and discomfort. Maybe that's necessary for their path, but what a difference a better primary question or a better kind of primary statement would make if you chose to select that instead.
Yeah, and I think very much I lived that embodiment of that "Am I safe?" Not only in the thoughts in my mind, though the thoughts in my mind. This is again the impact of this shift in working holistically in the messages that my body was sending my mind as well. It was reflected in the tension in my muscles, in the almost hunched over protective posture. As long as I can remember, I was, on the taller side. When you're a child, you usually have to line up in, size order. And I was always usually at the end of the line. So I was always taller for my age group. And my mom would always urge me to stand up straight. Right. And I think for me, all of this tension, this hunched over, this protection in my body really was the embodiment of my answer to that question overwhelmingly for decades of my life was no, I'm not safe, right? The world outside is scary, as was my lived experience of living in a city, of having very real crime and things that happen that could, create a lack of physical safety in my life, a lack of emotional safety when I didn't have that attunement. That before long, my body and the way I carried myself in the world was constantly sending my brain that message that no, Nicole, you aren't safe. So no amount of, affirmation, of nice idea, of just get yourself over it, think your way to safety, for me and for many of us and most of us, I could go as far to say, won't work, because while our mind is so incredibly powerful, so is the messages stored in our body. And if our nervous system is constantly on alert, not feeling safe, if our muscles are tense and not relaxed, then we can try and white knuckle and, affirm our way to safety all we want. Unless we start to teach our body safety, how to be present to what's happening around us, we're never going to shift that actual pattern.
There's a modality that I just recently tried for the first time. I had the creator of this modality. It's called TRE, trauma release exercises, and the inventor or the creator's name is David Berceli. A couple of years ago, I had him on my show, and we talked about it, and it sounded really good. And he also put out an offer to me that if I wanted to experience it myself, he would do a free session with me. And I did nothing with that. And then suddenly, out of the blue, boom, it comes to me from above, right? It wasn't just sitting in my subconscious somewhere. It was definitely a message from above. You need to take him up on this offer. Like 2 years, 3 years later. And so I did. And my wife, Orion, was in on the session with me. He worked on both of us. And it was incredible. You get to this place where your whole body is shaking because you're stressing your muscles, like your leg muscles, or some muscle group that is a big muscle group. So you stress it to the point where you're just holding it until it starts shaking, and then you keep that going, and then your whole body starts shaking, and it's as if your body's releasing trauma. Like if you've ever seen a dog get hit by a car, hopefully not. But if it lives and then it starts shaking off, like it's shaking off the trauma, that's what's happening. So, wow, I was just floored by that experience, and so was my wife. And so you can do it by yourself. You just um, kind of lay down somewhere, put your butt up in the air, and try and hold that position until you start shaking, and then the shaking spreads across your body. Have you ever heard of this? Ever experienced it?
Yes, I actually fell upon the concept, the practice of TRE several years ago. And through YouTube. I love learning via YouTube. I did exactly that. I learned and I did those individual practices of, stressing my muscles out and falling into that shaking cycle. And very interestingly, I'm happy you bring this up, Stephan. I after practicing that, somewhat regularly, I had my mom died probably about a year and a half ago now. And around that time, I was going through a lot of grief. I had a lot of, very tearful moments of, emotion coming out of my body, not only from my mom's physical death, from a lot of the healing that I've been doing, even before she left her physical body here, in terms of the reality of my relationship, that distance, a lot of grief around my mom in general. So when she physically passed, it came up to the surface. And I had many moments, and one in particular, I remember I was sitting on my couch and, I was in a fit of hysterics, crying, grieving, letting all this emotion out. And my body actually went into a shaking spasm on its own and almost kind of connected with that practice that I had been doing, in those moments of TRE, and allowed my body to go into that. And I just allowed it to happen. I was just present to it, heaving and crying, and now my body's shaking. And it was very much this whole, overwhelming, energetic experience that ultimately then on the other side of it led to a release. So I think, we are energetic bodies. I think practices that, somatic based practices, especially around this kind of holding in of trauma, of tension. I think so many of us are carrying it, sometimes even for lifetimes in our physical system, can be such an incredible, incredible tool in beginning to release that valve.
Yeah, amazing. Like some of these modalities can be life-saving, and there's so much out there. It's overwhelming. It's like what I've found is the more I just trust and sit back and kind of relax into this experience of life and let the river carry me instead of trying to swim it, then these certain modalities that are meant for me or meant for my wife or for my son or my one of my daughters, it just shows up at the exact moment it needs to. Like the TRE uh, session that we did 2 years after I interviewed David. It wasn't me. It wasn't my research or reviewing my to-do list. It just popped in my head. So yeah, we just I think tend to get in our own way and kick up resistance in our path, like Abraham Hicks describes. So
And I think beautifully, this all connects to when we're not connected to ourselves, to be able then to live in that aligned trust that I can be present to the universe that's sending me signs, that's, reminding me of this thing that would be beneficial, that's alerting me or affirming, my choice. When I don't trust or I'm not connected to that inner being, then I do attempt to control the world around me. I am in these habitual patterns where I don't even feel that I can be receptive. I'm not safe enough, or I can impact the world around me. So all this comes beautifully full circle. When we rebuild that connection, what we're really rebuilding is that trust for all of us who are under supported and, don't feel worthy and don't feel like we can have that present relationship with our emotions, because at one time we were completely overwhelmed by them, by our body's physical presence, by the emotional experience of being a human, right? That we've detached out of that felt protection. So as we become more connected to our being, as we learn to create more internal safety, then we can be safer to open ourselves up to the beautiful messages of the world around us, to working in collaboration. And in my opinion, that begins with trusting ourselves first and foremost, to be present to the messages as we need them, to be able to flow with life. And when we don't live in that trust, we do try to, manipulate, change, shift things, deny things as they are.
yeah, well said. Well said. Are there particular daily habits or routines that you use to reconnect with your authentic self, with your higher self?
So for me, it's building the foundational basis daily in terms of my body, and in mornings, before, I go about the schedulings I have for the day or the to-do list. For me, I've carved out time where, I'm up at an hour where I can have those moments to focus on myself and what I will intentionally, create. And it looks different each morning, though. I will have, moments of movement, where I'm doing, for me, yoga and gentle stretching to release all of that tension that I've been talking about is incredibly helpful. So I might do a movement, gentle stretching type practice in my morning time. For me, stressing my nervous system and learning how to be in a stressful experience. So I have actually it's coldish in the mornings now, so I might go stand outside in the cold weather or get into my cold plunge that I have, really testing again my body's ability to tolerate stress. And that's in the morning time, and having moments for, peaceful reflection, which might be me writing in my future self journal or reading a more kind of spiritually based book, just usually for a handful of minutes. And then throughout my day, my other commitment to my body is not only building in moments of rest when I need it, if I'm not feeling up to doing whatever I had, on my docket for the day, honoring what my body wants and what my body needs, but also making sure that I'm fueling my body with the nutrients that make it, kind of the most energetically available to me, and also then ending my day with sleep. Because to get up in the morning, I need to make sure that I'm getting the amount of hours I need. So any version of those promises are always top of mind to me. And an intentional commitment. That's not to say that every day goes exactly like that. There are still many days where, with that endless to-do list, with those habits that are always kind of urging me that I must do something to perform, to be good enough to be worthy, there are many moments where my focus is on that old habitual pattern of doing or, activating or not protecting those morning hours and diving right into work. So I just like to paint the full picture, because I think sometimes people hear, someone like myself talk and have the idea that every day I'm checking all those boxes so beautifully and being grounded and paying attention to my nutrition and resting and moving. And that's simply not the case. It's my intention to be a present to those moments in my day. And that's why consciousness for me is always at that foundation, because if I can show up as a conscious being at each moment of those choices, I give myself the opportunity to tend to my body or not to shift back into that old pattern or to show up in a new, more grounded way. So for me, it's always being conscious of the moments where I have choice, and then allowing myself the choices that I make.
Yeah. Progress, not perfection.
That's right.
Yeah. And do some of these exercises exist in your Meet Yourself, How to Meet Yourself workbook, so that people can go through some of these processes?
Yeah, so I very intentionally imagining most people that will pick up a workbook entitled How to Meet Yourself, the self, of course, that many are aware that I'm referencing and that we've been touching upon here in this conversation is our authentic self. I very intentionally separated the workbook into three major sections, with the Meet Your Authentic Self not actually coming until section 3. So very much mirroring this entire conversation that we are having here today. As the workbook, as you progress through the workbook, the first chunk of work is becoming conscious to the fact that we are so habitual, from the habits that take us through our day, how we care for our body, to the habitual ways that we make sense or assign meaning in our mental world, to the moments around us, to the habitual ways that we deal with our emotions. So becoming conscious will be the first set of tools that you'll meet on the journey throughout How to Meet Yourself, the workbook. And then we begin to peel back all of those layers, exploring first the physical body and the need for safety and regulation in our nervous system to even be able to be this grounded, aligned presence that we keep kind of going back to, and then peeling the next layer back and seeing all of this mental world of our ego and our inner child that's coloring our interpretations of the world and our reactivity, and then peeling that back finally, and then giving ourselves that space that we've been talking about to get curious and to begin to explore that authentic self. So that journey, that roadmap, and all of the tools that you'll need to begin that journey are all in the pages of How to Meet Yourself, and are also something that I talk about daily on all of the content platforms that we put out content here on my own, the podcast, the Self Healer Soundboard. So in many ways, I'm trying to, promote these tools, these concepts, and these tools even outside of course, purchasing the workbook.
Amazing. And I'm guessing that these themes are covered on your podcast as well.
Yeah, so actually part of the podcast, my co-host and partner, Jenna, and I, we talk about not only just concepts, conversations in terms of our healing journey in general. We've made a commitment to spend, and I think we probably have about 3 episodes out already, and we'll do several more where we're deep diving into the workbook itself. So if you choose to purchase the workbook, you can follow along with us. If you choose not to purchase the workbook, you can tune in to those specific self healer soundboard episodes, and usually it'll be noted how to meet yourself in the title. And you can listen to us actually go through exercises, deep dive, talk about us doing those particular exercises, so you can follow along throughout the journey.
Awesome. Well, you're doing amazing work in the world, so thank you for that, and best of luck in the unfolding of your journey and all the amazing things that you're up to in the world. I look forward to your next book, whatever that ends up being.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the work you do, for having this conversation with me. Thank you for all of you listening to this conversation. And yeah, I'm super excited about my next book as well. It'll be on relationship.
Awesome. So again, where do we send our listener to if they wanted to listen to your podcast, buy your books, become part of your community, your self-healer circle, and help heal themselves and change the world?
Yes, all the things. So, whatever platform that you consume content in, you could give a search for the Holistic Psychologist on Instagram, on YouTube, on TikTok, on Twitter, and you'll find our account there. The workbook, as well as my first book, How to Do the Work, is available wherever major book retailers or wherever books are sold. So, wherever you prefer to buy books, you could take a look there, and chances are that they will have that. Our podcast, The Self Healer Soundboard, is on Apple, Spotify. We even have a YouTube channel if you want to watch the visual of it at the Self Healer Soundboard on our YouTube page.
Awesome. And we'll put all the links in the show notes for this episode too. Thank you so much, Nicole. And thank you, listener. I hope you've been as much inspired by this interview as I have. Now you got to put it into action. We'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.